will be killed. So what the case is, according to one opinion in the Gemara, one opinion in the Mishnah, if an enemy kills somebody that he hates, and he claims that it was an accident, but we know it could have been intentional. We see this type of act that happened. He was hunting for animals, but his enemy happened to be in the area, and he knew his enemy was also hunting for animals, and you find his enemy dead. So did he intend to kill that person, his enemy, or not? So one opinion in the Mishnah says that you could bet that he definitely intended to kill that person, and therefore, because of that, he's going to get killed for that. Now, the Gemara is going to ask the question, what do you mean? He didn't get any warning. There was no warning given to the enemy. The enemy who killed his enemy was not warned. So how could the rabbi say in the Mishnah that we're going to kill someone without being warned? To that, the Gemara is going to say, that this opinion of the Mishnah holds that you do not need, the only reason why you need a warning is to know that the guy is doing it intentionally. If he's not warned, maybe he didn't know, maybe he didn't intend to do it, but when you give a guy a warning, so now he knows that he's not allowed to do it. He knows that, and also by giving the guy a warning, you say, if you do this, you tell the guy, if you do this act, you are gonna get killed if you do this act. So, but if we know the guy knows that he's doing this act, if we know he knows he's doing this act, so then there's no need to, according to this opinion, you don't need to give the warning. There's no need to give the warning if the guy knows that he's going to kill somebody. There's no need. What are you warning him for? So good. But the point is, an enemy. This opinion holds. An enemy. We know for sure. Rashi says that he definitely intended to kill his enemy. That's that opinion of the Mishnah. The other opinion in Mishnah is not that way. The other opinion says that we won't send him to exile, but it's not that he intended to kill him. Okay, so that's what the Gemara. That's in the Gemara yesterday where we got up to. Rabbi Yossi Omer Soni Nerak. Good morning, Jaime.
Good morning.
We got up to Tet Amud Beis yesterday. 9b, where the Gemara is trying to understand the opinion of one of the rabbis of the Mishnah that says that someone who hates somebody, hasonei neherag. If in Tet Amud Beis, the Mishnah says, Dr. Navid, we are on the first wide lines on Tet Amud Beis, and in the art scroll, in the English, it is on 9b2, 9b2 on the right side, top right column. Rabbi Yossi Omer hasonei neherag. Rabbi Yossi says that when an enemy kills somebody, when an enemy kills his enemy, someone hates somebody, and you find the other guy dead, and you don't know whether it was done intentionally or unintentionally, you could bet that he did it intentionally. You could bet that this type of act was not done unintentionally. It's not by chance that he killed his enemy. He might want to cover up. He might want to say, I didn't mean it. But you could be certain that he killed him intentionally. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. There's another opinion.
Are all enemies known? If people are enemies, is that known to the general public always?
Okay, so that's a great question. So some say, what makes someone an enemy? Right, Dr. Navid? So some say if this person is out to get the other guy, it's known. He's trying to snitch on him. There are some people that's known. He's constantly trying to hurt this guy. That's one way to know, and it's known to the public. It's known to the public this guy is out to get him. He's always bad mouthing him. That's one way that's called an enemy. And the Rambam, interesting, says that an enemy is somebody out of hate, because you're angry with the guy and you don't talk to the guy for 3 days. The 3 days that you had opportunity to, you didn't talk to him for 3 days. Sounds like you came across him each one of those 3 days. And each one of those days, imagine you're working in the same office with somebody, but you don't talk to the guy because of your hate for the guy. And that's why you don't talk to the guy. That's the Rambam says that's called an enemy, which is interesting. I mean, compared to the other definition, where the guy actually is doing active things. He's actually trying to hurt the other guy, whatever, by snitching and other things. And this guy, he doesn't talk to the guy. But he doesn't, I don't talk to you. You could say hello to me. I don't talk to you. I ignore you. That is somebody who is an enemy, according to the Rambam. And that person, if we find that person kills another guy, you could, according to this opinion in the Mishnah, it's certain that he intended to kill the guy. It's not a question. Unless somehow we know for sure that it was unintended, we could say with certainty, according to the first opinion in the Mishnah, that he definitely intended to kill him. And therefore, if he intended to kill him, we can actually kill that enemy for that. But the Gemara has a problem. We all know, we've been learning, we've said in Makkos that there's a technical law called hatra'ah, called warning. The court never punishes anybody unless the guy is warned for his act, right, Dr. Navid? You don't just, even if a guy intended to kill somebody, there's a technical point that he has to be warned. Of course, if he doesn't get a warning, there are certain, God's going to take care of it. Or even we found when it comes to murder, if a guy killed without a warning, he intended to kill the guy, killed without a warning, the court can't kill him, but the court could cause his death. That's what we found by placing him somewhere, giving him certain foods that he'll die, he'll rot, whatever the case will be. But specifically, the Rambam says the only time we do that is for murder, because how it disrupts society. Any other situation, a person was Mechala Shabbat and he was not warned, the court will not do that. The court will not cause his death. But if a guy murdered somebody intentionally, but was a technical loophole because he wasn't warned, the court will do some other things to help make sure that the guy is going to leave this world. But now the Gemara is asking the question: how could the court kill this guy? The guy wasn't warned. That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says that's we're on the page. We are the first white line. Dr. Navid, the first white line on 9b. Rabbi Yossi Omer hasonei neharat. The sonei, the enemy, gets killed. V'holo atubei, but they didn't give the guy a warning. Atra is the language of atra. You see that, Dr. Navid? They didn't warn him. You see the word? Atrubei is hatra. So the Gemara answers, Masnitin, our Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah, is Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehudahi. That's the Rabbi Yossi of Bar Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, that holds the following. He's of the opinion in the certain situations, you do not need to give a guy a warning. What does he say? The Tanya. We have a Braita. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Omer, Chover. Chover is someone who's a Talmud Chacham. Someone who's a Talmud Chacham, Eino Sarich Hatra. It's interesting, I presume that the Haber family is Chover. It's really Chover. Most probably they had the name Haber because they were Talmid Chachamim in their family. Maybe that's why they were called Chover. Chaver eino sarich hatra'ah. Chaver does not require a warning. Somebody who is learned, he knows the law. That person eino sarich hatra'ah. He does not need to be warned. Meaning to say, if we know in a case where we know the chaver intended to do this act, he willingly did a certain act, but let's say he used a razor blade on his beard. Chas v'shalom. Now, he did it in front of witnesses, but the witnesses did not warn him that you can't use a razor blade on your beard. Does he get lashes? According to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, since you know he did it intentionally, he was doing this intentionally. He took a razor blade and he was taking a shave. You know that he knows that he can't do that. How do you know that he knows that you can't use a razor blade? Because he's a chaver. He's a learned man. Maybe you have some uneducated Jews that don't know you can't use a razor blade on your beard. They think that the Gillette razor blade like this is allowed. But if someone who is learned, he knows you can't use the razor blade. You're only going to give him Makkos. Why? Because you have witnesses. As long as you have witnesses that could come to the court to say that we saw that he willingly did this act, even though he wasn't warned, we could give him Makkos. Correct, Dr. Levin? According to this opinion, not the halacha, but that's the opinion of Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, but that's his opinion. Why? Yeah, but sometimes, but according to this opinion, you wouldn't need a warning for that. According to this opinion, but sometimes you don't know that the person intended to kill the guy, right? A person might know that you can't kill, but maybe he wasn't intending to kill the guy. Maybe he was just trying to shoot the animal, but he shot the person. But when it comes to the enemy, you can say for sure he intended to kill the guy. But he holds the official nitna, the warning was not given. Nitna is from the word new, to give. It was not given pain. It was not given the warning that the Torah requires warning, is elal hafchin, to discern, to know, being shogeg lemezid, to make sure, in order that the person cannot say, I didn't know I couldn't do that. So the warning makes sure that the person can't say such a thing. Because now that you were warned, so you do know. You can't create an excuse. You can't cover up for yourself and say, I didn't know I couldn't do that. I didn't know I couldn't cook on Shabbat. I didn't know I could pick up the fire, so I could put on the fire and cook. So comes the warning and lets you know that. But if you are a chaver, if you know the law, so you don't need the warning. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. Okay, and that's the reason why according to his opinion, the enemy, without being warned, is able to be killed for killing his enemy, because he doesn't need the warning. He knows that he can't. And obviously we're talking about a person who knows you can't kill. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is also referred as Rebbe. Rebbe in the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. This is a different person. Usually, when its name is Rebbe, sometimes you find the Gemara Rav Yossi, Rav Yochanan, and then you have Rebbe Yehuda, Rebbe Shimon. Rebbe usually indicates they had smicha. They had a formal smicha. Rav Shimon Omer, Yesh sonei gola. Rav Shimon says that there's a sonei that's gola. We're in the fourth wide line. Rav Shimon says there's a sonei that gets exiled. What does Rav Shimon say? There's different types of people. There's an enemy. When an enemy does an act, if there's possibility to say he did it intentionally, you don't know. He's not of the opinion that says that an enemy kills the other guy. You definitely know he intended to kill his enemy. He says it's possible he didn't intend, but it's possible he did intend. So if you're not sure in such a case, you can't send them to exile. You can't send exile because the exile has to be something where it's clear it was unintentional. But if it's a case that it's possible that it was done intentional, but you don't know, so you can't send to exile. But there's a case that he would go to exile if it's pretty clear to you that he did not intend to kill the guy. What will be that case? What say? Chopping wood according to Rebbe, and the wood goes hits the other guy. How could you say he's intending to kill the other guy with that piece of wood, the chip going off the thing? But that's according to Rebbe understanding. Or let's say, I would just say a simple case, perhaps. You're going down a ladder, and now a guy Now the question is, a guy falls down the ladder. He knows he himself could get hurt too. I don't know that a guy would want to fall from a high spot on a ladder just to kill someone else when he himself could get killed. So if the guy was going down the ladder, I would think if the ladder was a very high ladder and he falls off and he kills his enemy, I presume you could say he wasn't intending to kill his enemy. Or let's say he couldn't see who came into the room, who's underneath the ladder. Whatever the case was, there's a case according to him that the Sone would go to exile. So Tanya. Right, depending if it was now the Gemara is going to. So we're going to see, Dr. Navid, that everybody, after they killed someone, they would run to exile. We're going to see. Everybody ran to exile. But what happened afterwards, we're going to see, is that the court would bring them out, put them on trial, recognize was it intentional, unintentional, and then figure out, or any of the cases. Either the court will send them home, but let's say was it ones, unintentional, totally accidental. But Torah says run to exile. So some understand that everybody runs to exile. We're going to see that. We'll get that to the Mishnah. But the Gemara is the Bright is going to give even more another case of how was it an accident. Here the Gemara is going to give a better case. Tanya, Ketzad Amar Rab Shimon Yesh Sonei Goleh Yesh Sonei She'ena Goleh. What is the case? That one of the jobs of a Braita is to explain the Mishnah. And the Braita is also bothered to understand what's the case talking about that he'll go to exile, the enemy, according to Rav Shimon, and what's the case he won't go? That's the question. Ketzad means how? What's the case? Ketzad, what is the situation that Rav Shimon says that a Sonne Goleh, that an enemy goes to exile, and V'yesh Sonne, and when's the situation that he says She'ena Goleh, that he does not go to exile? Because we're afraid that it might have been done intentionally. So the Gemara says, here's the case, Mr. Safdie, listen to the case of the Gemara. Nifsak Goleh, you were lowering a barrel. Let's say you were lowering a barrel from your window, and the rope snapped, and the enemy is underneath. Or so that you go to exile because you did not, there's no way you can know that the rope is going to break. That it's going to rip. You know, if you will say that the barrel itself falls off, you drop it, maybe that's different. Maybe you intend to drop it. But if the thing rips in the middle, that's not something that that will be a case that we will say he goes to exile. But it's unintentional. But if it slipped out of the hands of the enemy, the barrel is going down from the roof to the ground and it slips out of his hands, so then we're concerned that it slipped, meaning if it fell, we're concerned he really dropped it intentionally. It wasn't a slip. It was a intended slip. And therefore he won't go to exile. So the Gemara asks the question, Tanya, we learned in the Braita differently than we just said. We had in the name of Rav Shimon Omer, Rav Shimon says, La'olam eino goleh. Whether a person is an enemy of somebody, whether a person is a friend of somebody, he will not go to exile ad sheyishameit machsalo miyodo. Mean machsalo is that utensil that the Mishnah was talking about. If you have a utensil that they would smear the cement or on the roof when they wanted to make the roof smooth, and they would use this utensil to go ahead and move around the cement. So it has to slip from his hands. Not if, let's say, but not a case if the rope snaps. Reb Shimon says there's no galut. There's no galut, there's no exile in a case when the rope, when you're lowering something down and the rope snaps and you're holding the remainder of the rope in your hand. There's no galut in such a case. The only time there's galut when the whole item slips out of your hand. That's the opinion of Reb Shimon. Nishmat is to slip. Nishmat is to slip. Is to fall. It's to fall off. Slip away. That means he doesn't go to exile until the utensil, the tool, slips out of his hand. To exclude if the item snapped in the middle. Meaning to say that in order to go to galut, the item that killed the person was totally released from the hand of the person. There was nothing left in the hand of the person who caused the accident. If there was something left in the hand of the person that caused the accident, if he has the remainder of the rope, that's not a case that'll go to exile. We're gonna. Morning, Morris. Welcome back. I mean, you're going back on right. The first case of the Braita, when it says Nishmat Eino Goleh, when it slipped, he does not go to exile. That's because we're afraid that maybe he intentionally, because we're talking about an enemy. The first Braita. That's what the Gemara is, because Reb Shimon is talking about right, because Reb Shimon is focusing on an enemy, right? The Reb Shimon says, Tanya, Ketzat. Is lowering the barrel. No, if he slips out of his hands, he won't go. According to the first case, why not? He won't go because we're afraid that he intended to kill him. But we're not going to. Shimon doesn't hold that we're going to kill him, but we're not going to allow him to go to exile. We're not going to send to exile because he's in between. Meaning he doesn't get killed by the court. He doesn't go to exile. No, because we don't know for sure. He holds, we don't know for sure. It slipped out of his hand. Enemy lowering by and it falls. So according to this, but even if it's, but we don't. Is it possible? Is again when you're lowering a barrel, there's contents in the barrel too. And you might not want to have lost it. You might not want to have slipped it. You might not intend to slip. It's possible that you did not intend to drop it. So as long as it's possible, we don't know for sure you intended to drop it. So we can't kill the guy, but we can't send him to exile. Because to send someone to exile to go look, we need to know that it was unintentional. Right, Morris? But if it's possible, if there's reason to believe that he did this, most normal people will not want to cause an accident to kill somebody else. But this guy being an enemy, but you see this case is an enemy, There we are concerned that the enemy possibly intended to kill his enemy. And therefore, he will not go to exile. So far, both cases are enemy. We'll see if the Gemara in the end might make a move, might switch it. But meaning, because if you look at the Gemara brings the first bright that doctrine of it, the Gemara opens up. Shimon Omer, Yesone Gola. Tanya, Ketzan Omer of Shimon, Yesone Gola, Yesone Yeshene Gola. So it's clear that the focus of the first bright is about an enemy. That's clear. We're going to see later about the second bright. But the Gemara at this point is also understanding that the second bright is also talking about an enemy. And what does the second bright say? Vatanya, Reb Shimon Omer, Lo'olam eina goleh ashi yishamet machselo miyodo. He says, number one, he says, if it slips, he will go to exile, which is totally the opposite of what we said before. If it slips and nothing's left, which means not only it slipped, point one, point two is nothing is left in his hand. Meaning to say, if something snapped in the middle, which he has half the rope left in his hand, he won't go to exile. So the Gemara is going to say that this second Braita is arguing on the first Braita in two points. There are two issues here. Number one, this Braita says if it slips out of his hands, he goes to exile. And the previous Braita says if it slips out of his hands, he does not go to exile. And because we're concerned that it wasn't a real slip, right? We're concerned he dropped it. And this Braita said no, he will go to exile. Point one. Point two is that the previous Braita says that if it snapped, the rope snapped when you're lowering a barrel, and someone gets killed, he goes to exile. And this Braita says no, the snapping of the rope will not go to exile. Mr. Safdie, you see the 2 points? So there's 2 points that they are there. So that's what the Gemara is now going to do. The Gemara is going to ask. Say that again. He said the first Braita says if it slips, he does not go to exile. Correct, Dr. Navid? But the second Braita says, what does the second Braita say? The first Braita says Nishmat Eina Goleh. First Braita says if it slips, he does not go to exile. Why? We're afraid it wasn't a slip. Correct? And what does the second Braita say? Of Shimon Omer, L'olam. You have the second Vatanya. Always. L'olam, always, in all circumstances. Eino goleh, he will not go to exile, unless she yishamet maslo mirdo, unless it slips from his hand. Before you told me if he slips, it does not go to goleh. Right, and before you told me if it slipped, he does not go to exile. And here Rav Shimon said he will go to exile. He wants it to, in order for it to go to exile, he says he needs to slip. So that is the Gemara's question. The Gemara asks, Kasha, there's a difficulty. There is apparent contradiction between nifsak and nifsak. There's a contradiction between the case where the rope snapped to the case where the rope snapped. One case, the Braita indicates if the rope snaps, Morris, when you're lowering a barrel and someone gets killed, you're obligated to exile, go there. And the second Braita says, no, we don't go to exile if the rope snaps. Kasha, nishmat, and nishmat. There's also a contradiction between nishmat, the slipping of the item, to the case of slipping of the item. Because the first Braita says if it's nishmat, it slipped, does not go to exile. And the second Braita says if it slipped, it does go to exile. So that is the Gemara's issue. We have 2 difficulties, 2 apparent contradictions in the Braita, and they're all in the same rabbi. They're all in Rabbi Shimon. So that's the Gemara's question. How can we have 2 different things saying what one rabbi is saying? If you have 2 different rabbis could say different things. Shammai could say, Shiluk could say, but the same rabbi is usually consistent. Not that he's going to disagree with himself. That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara answers the following. The Gemara says, I'm going to go with the Girsah. You mentioned Rashi. We're going to take Rashi's text and we're going to put it into the Gemara. You see the brackets, or maybe you don't have brackets in your Gemara. Nishmat and Nishmat lo kasha. Morning, Jake. Nishmat and Nishmat lo kasha. There is no contradiction between the case of slipping and the case of slipping. Why not? Because they're two different cases. We thought, as Dr. Navid pointed out earlier, we thought that the case was talking about the enemy, right? The first case is clear. He says Rabbi Shimon says there's an enemy that goes to exile. He's clearly talking about an enemy. And that's where he went on record and he says when it slips, you don't go to exile because we're afraid with an enemy, it wasn't a real slip. You really intended to drop it on the guy. So that's the case of an enemy, the first Breita. But the second Breita, where it's not mentioned enemy, the second Breita, Reb Shimon makes a statement. He says a person only goes to Galut, he goes to Galut when it slips. That's the second Breita. He goes to Galut when he slips. That's not talking about an enemy. He didn't mention enemy in the second Breita. Not talking about an enemy. The Gemara says, Nishman an lo kash ha ba'ohev. The second Breita that says he goes to exile when it actually slipped out of his hands, because he was a friend. If it was a friend, he did not intend to slip it out of his hands. And therefore, if it slipped out of his hands, the tool slipped out of his hands. He was working on the roof, the tool, and he was moving this tool back, he was moving the tool forward, and then it dropped from his hands, that guy will go to Golut. It was, as we said, morning Mike, because it was not his enemy, since it wasn't him, Mike, here's the Gemara right here. It's not his enemy, and since it's not his enemy, welcome. Since it's not his enemy, he will go to Galut. But the other Breita, Bisoneh. The Breita that says that if it slipped out of his hands, he does not go to exile, that's talking about a hidden enemy. And there we are concerned that he was covering up. It wasn't a slip. He made it look like it slipped out of his hand, but it wasn't a slip. Then the Gemara says, Nifsak and Nifsak lo kasha. The apparent contradiction between the rope snapping in one Breita, where the Breita says if the rope snaps, he goes to exile. The second Breita says if the rope snaps, he does not go to exile. That's because it's two different opinions. The Gemara says, the Breita that says that the second Breita that says if it snaps, it does not go to exile. That Breita holds like Rebbe. That Rebbe says in the Mishnah that there's nothing left in the person's hand. In the case of the Mishnah, he holds if you have an axe and the iron goes flying from the axe, and you're chopping wood, and then you're about to go ahead and hit the tree, and then but the metal of the handle, the metal of the axe went flying. You still have the handle in your hand. He holds you will not go to exile in such a case. He holds the case of the Torah that you go to exile is when a piece of the wood of the tree comes off the tree. Nothing in your hand. You are chopping the wood against the tree, and a piece of wood from the tree goes and hits somebody. But if there's something remaining in your hand, that's not the case that the Torah says you will go to exile. So therefore, if some of the rope is remaining in your hand, when it snaps, it's connected to you, meaning it sounds like that the case that you have to go to exile is when it's a little bit. It's removed from you. It's not connected. The thing that did the damage is not held by you, that's the case you go to exile. But in the case where you're still holding on to the rope, that will not go to exile. But right. But the question is, there are specific cases in the Torah that says that a person will go to exile. Let's say Rebbe says the fact that the handle that the metal of the axe was flying. You see, he says that that's not the case. The Torah will say you go to exile. The family will be very angry at him. It's true. The family will be very angry at him. It could be that the reason why there's no exile in such a case is maybe perhaps he holds it's more negligence. Maybe because you should have checked the metal. Maybe you didn't check the metal well enough. But maybe it wasn't strongly attached to it. Right. Sometimes not. You can't go to exile because exile might not be enough. Meaning, exile, he might need more than that. So therefore, if he might need more, we can't send them. Sometimes there's two possibilities. Sometimes he doesn't go to exile because he's not the servant of exile, so he has to relocate and move to such a way. And sometimes he doesn't go to exile because it might not be enough of an atonement. We need to know that's enough of atonement. So the Gemara says, Rabbanan, the first writer that says that if it snapped, if the rope snapped, he will go to exile. That's the opinion of the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan say, just like the Rabbanan say that by the axe, when you have an axe and the metal goes flying and you're holding the handle, you go to exile. So too, the rope, holding the rope, after it snapped, would be very similar, and he would go to exile. So that's what the Gemara says. And tomorrow we're going to get into more details about the Ori Miklat, the 6 Ori Miklat, the 6 cities of refuge. We're going to talk more about that. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. Jaime, have a great day. Okay. So Jake, you got it. Yeah, we met 12:30. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan.
What's it?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Good to see you, Mike.